you are familiar with the book of Proverbs, you will know that it is replete with bold, black and white statements of contrast. For instance, in Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 1, it says about women, "The wise woman builds, the foolish woman pulls it down with her hands." Now, what is stated in that verse is essentially true of what all of the book of Proverbs says. Our attention is drawn to the different type of women that there are. In fact, the book of Proverbs puts it in bold, black and white statements of contrast, and it says there are two main categories of women. There are good women, and there are bad women. There are excellent, wise, virtuous women, and there are also women virtue. Some of those women spoken about in Proverbs that lack virtue are referred to as immoral women. And if you know the book of Proverbs, you know that on numerous occasions throughout this book, the godly father warns his son to beware of the style woman. But Proverbs also speaks about a contentious woman. Vivid picture images are used to explain how painful it would be to live with a strong-willed, self-absorbed woman who's quick to complain, sulk, or get angry when she's denied. So I was thinking about that. I remember as a kid when I was asked to come to Sunday school or Christian Endeavour the next week with a Bible verse. I remember going along with some of the other young lads, and we would come to that next week with a Bible verse, and often we would pick up Proverbs 21 and verse 9. "Better to dwell in the corner of a housetop or in the roof than with a house shared with a contentious woman." I mean, what did a little boy know about those things? But it was one of the things we did. Or Proverbs 27:15, "A continual dripping on a very rainy day and a contentious woman are better to live in the desert or in the wilderness than with an angry and contentious woman." Now, by the looks on your faces, obviously we can find humour in some of those verses, but they are really very serious and godly counsel. And yet, in contrast to that counsel, to beware of such, chapter 31 holds up the excellent woman. That is the woman that is most desirable. She is the ideal woman. Nowhere in the entire Bible is a virtuous woman more clearly explained than in Proverbs chapter 31. Lemuel is mentioned. He's called king. But when he was a prince, verse 1, it talks about him. Prince Lemuel had a mother who knew what a virtuous woman looks like in real life. So, his mother describes one of these women so that Lemuel will know what type of woman to search for his own woman, for his own wife. To aid her son to remember this description so that it's not in one ear and out the other, what we have in this paragraph of verses 10 to 31 is effectively a Hebrew poem. And it's very skillfully written, maybe in the English. But of course originally this was Hebrew, and what the mother did is she commenced each verse with successive letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And of course that's done elsewhere in the Bible, but it's one of the places in the Bible here it's done. It's done in Psalm 119, we know each paragraph is done. Well, it's done in the book of Lamentations. And the reason this is done, this is the paragraph from verse 10 to 31, it was written to be memorized. It was written to be internalized. In a sense, this passage was to go with Lemuel all his days. It was to go with him from his youth into fatherhood, and then surely into grandfatherhood. Well, last week we began to unpack the passage and we saw, remember, her recorded life. And there we saw that in some ways we can explain this passage as if God mounted a video camera in every room of this roaming camera to go with this woman wherever she went when she left the house. And yet we also had to recognise that there was editing that happened before the final product came into print. That is, all her sins, all her shortcomings had been edited out of this passage. As we said last week, there is not one bad hair day We also saw her rare existence. Who can find a virtuous wife? We also saw her rich value, that is, her worth is far above rubies, and we saw more broadly and generally her role and her realm. All her days, she does good to her husband. That's a career woman. All her labours, whether they are in or out of the home, are for the good of her husband and for the benefit of the entire household. This morning we want to come and take a closer look then at this recording, this video recording, and we want to learn what she is really like. Is play the video recording, play the tape through. Last week we went fast forward, we skimmed it quickly. Well, today we're going to go just the standard speed, and we're going to press the pause button every once in a while to park in certain areas and to notice various aspects, various godly virtues within life. What I've entitled then, the sermon today, is The Virtuous Woman, Her Practical Godliness. Last week, remember, a virtuous woman, a precious gift. This week, the virtuous woman, her practical godliness. Now, there is so much here in this page to say everything, so I'm going to limit our consideration to 4 areas. And they will be these. Firstly, her faithful reliance. Secondly, her industrious diligence. Thirdly, her compassionate tenderness. And fourthly, adherence. So let's come then this morning and play this recording and notice these 4 aspects of her life. Firstly, her faithful reliance. Look with me in your copy of the Bible, Proverbs 31, verses 10 and 11. Who can find a virtuous wife? For her, the heart of her husband safely trusts her, so he will have no lack of gain. The heart of this woman's husband safely trusts her, verse 11 says. Now, for her husband to fully trust her, she must be a woman of ability and reliance. This woman here is not like so many women, primarily governed by fleeting, passing, turbulent emotions. There's a stability here. Well, it begs the question, where does she get her stability? With all other aspects, when it comes to her virtues, I believe they are rooted in verse 30. So verse 30, if you like, is right at the end, and in some sense, it's the starting point. Verse 30 says, charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, but a woman who, here it is, fears the Lord, she shall be praised. This morning, her root virtue out of which all of this grows is her relationship with God. The virtuous woman's stability and reliability then is anchored in God. It's anchored in God's character. It's anchored in God's strength from the knowledge that God is sovereign. She draws strength from the knowledge that God's grace is sufficient no matter the difficulties that arise in her life. Her stability then is not primarily because of her circumstances in her life, that she is going through a stable. Her stability is not primarily due to her relationship with her husband, nor her relationship with her children or some other friends. It's due to her relationship with God. She is conscious, this woman, that wherever she goes, God's eye is upon her. Be trusted. That would mean that you could tell this woman something in confidence and you will know that she won't spread it around. Now, it's a fact that the Bible repeatedly raises the issue that many women, and it's in the New Testament, so even Christian women, have problems with their tongue. Woman, the heart of her husband safely trusts her. If he, the husband, tells her some of the things that were discussed by the elders at the gate on that particular day, she doesn't gossip it about the town. He trusts her. He can rely on her. This husband is not a husband. He's not wondering whether his wife's where she is and what she's up to. She's earned his respect and trust. He knows that when she leaves the home and she has to have interaction with other people, and in her case, in this case of this woman, due to her enterprising business dealings, even as she negotiated, of course, would have been males. her husband safely trusts her. He doesn't ring her throughout the day, continually checking up on her. She's a faithful woman. He trusts her. He doesn't need to interrogate her when she gets home after being out all day, wanting to know what she's been up to. Or when he gets home at the end of the day, he doesn't need to interrogate her to find out what she's been doing when he's been out all day. He trusts her. The heart, the passage says, the heart of her husband safely trusts her. In other words, deep that she's a good and a faithful woman. He knows that he has one of those wise women that we read, or I quoted before from Proverbs 14. He knows that he has a woman who is building that house, that not behind his back she's tearing it down with her hands. He safely trusts her. There's a sense of being with her. He feels safe with her. It's very practical, this. This husband is able to trust her even with his hard-earned money. Even large sums of money. Verse 16, remember? She considers, from her profit, she plants a vineyard. We're not talking about then a couple of $100 in our terms for housekeeping or groceries once a week. We're talking in our terms, we're talking of hundreds of thousands of dollars. This woman has proven over the long haul that she can to recklessly spend her husband's money. We often joke, don't we, about women loving to go shopping and buying up big. And as we've often said in our family in the past, it's the old pick and pay. One of our ladies used to work in the pick and pay hypermarket. For those who remember that some years ago. And we would often say, well, she picks and I'm left to pay. The godly woman is faithful in her use of money. And ultimately, it's because she knows she has to answer to. Remember in verse 30, by a godly fear. She knows that what she does, even what she does with that money, is under the eye of God. And therefore she is faithful, even in her stewardship of that money that's being entrusted to her and her husband. Notice other matters that I think come under this second heading, her industrious diligence. And it seems to me that this is perhaps the main point that is sounded throughout this entire paragraph. And there are different emphases, there are different aspects of this. Her industrious diligence, or what we could say is presented as the industrious woman. And the summary verse, or part of the verse, is in verse 27. Now it's put negatively, but it's put negatively and makes it really clear what the case is. She watches over the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Tells us that we should be looking for as much ease and as much pleasure that we could possibly squeeze into our lives. But not this woman. The godly woman knows she's been made to work. It's not just the man's role to work and she sits back and does nothing. No, and she's got a right attitude in this area. Look at verse 13. We see the attitude comes out. She seeks wool and flax and willingly works with her hands. She's not a reluctant worker. She's willingly working with her hands. Verse 15 says, she also rises light. In other words, she gets up before the sun. In a culture like ours that promotes self-indulgence, this aspect stands out in her life. This woman is energetic. This woman is diligent in the use of her time. Verse 18, her merchandise is good, and her lamp does not go out by night. In other words, she's also willing to keep working late some nights in order to finish the job that she has started. She knows that product that she's been making at home is going to get a good return, and she knows that she needs to do more of that, so she stays up late. She burns the oil right there through the night. Now perhaps it is, ladies, you look at verse 15 and you look at verse 18 and you think, when does she sleep? And you may be saying to yourself, well, I certainly need my beauty sleep. When does she? Well, I don't think we necessarily need to think that Every day she's up before the sun. And every day she stays up late, and it seems to almost suggest she works through the night. There are seasons, we all know this. There are seasons when this woman needs to get up early to get food that is necessary on that particular day for her family and even the portion for the maidservants. And when that day comes, she's willing to get up early in order to do that task. And when she has to stay up late, she's willing. You remember what I said last week about that we could almost say it goes over several weeks? This is a general description in this passage, in different rooms, on different days. I don't think this is all happening on the same day. I don't think you can't do all this on the same day. And she is diligent not just when she's at home, but when she leaves the home to fulfill some other duty, no one's looking over her shoulder. Is she out at the coffee shop all day? Is she out window shopping all day? Is she at home watching television or on the internet? No. Remember who this woman is according to verse 30. This woman fears God. She knows that God is watching. She delights to please her God and Saviour. She's like those ants, diligently gathering food from afar without an overseer watching over them. You see, the virtuous woman is diligent morning. She's diligent at night. She's diligent in the home. She's diligent out of the home. She doesn't expect life to be soft and... Actually, she's sacrificial in her work for others. The woman that's presented to us here, she's skillful. She's proficient and she's profitable in her industry. She evidently does her homework so that she can get the best bargain she can. In verse 13, it's wool and flax. So she knows that there are some situations where she can go and get the basic materials from which she can make something cheaper than which she can buy it. But she would also know as a diligent, godly woman that there may be in our day situations then you can make them. So she's wise. In verse 14, she is like the merchant ships. She brings her food from afar. What type of ships does this say? Merchant ships. Well, they're the ships from far-off places. The point is, this woman is willing to go and get the best price for whatever the product is. Maybe it's the groceries. And she acts wisely in doing that. She's willing to use that effort and to use the time if it's going to be of gain for the... Now, obviously, she's wise. She's not going to go, in terms of how we would say today, she's not going to go across town and spend an extra $10 on petrol just to save $5 on the grocery bill. She's not going to do that. She's not going to come over and say, look how much money I saved you. Oh, by the way, I had to put extra petrol in the car. And why is it that the husband trusts her to dabble in real estate? Well, perhaps it's because he knows that before she makes an offer on that block of land, she's been diligently researching. She's been getting a feel for the real estate market. So she's not going to be conned by that local homework. She's diligent. Look at verse 19. She stretches out her hands to the distaff, and her hand holds the spindle. Now, what's Lemuel's mother describing in this scene? Could it be that this image is at night? Some would suggest that's what this is, and we're not told when it is, but perhaps that makes sense. The distaff, if you like, is a piece of wood on which the raw wool is placed, and then when it's twisted, it becomes thread, it's put on the spindle. She has a distaff, it seems, in one hand, a spindle in the other. What's she doing? She is willing to do the work of a servant. Now that's significant. Remember who we saw this woman was. Remember, she's from, if you like, the upper class. She has servants, but she doesn't think she's above these simpler things in life. She turns bread into cloth. She turns the cloth into garments. She's taken the time to learn those skills. She's taken the time throughout her life to learn new skills, to become proficient in this type of activity in order that she may her household with what they need, especially, according to verse 21, because winter's coming. Look at verse 21. She is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household is clothed with scarlet. Now, perhaps this doesn't relate to them, and it does to other Christians in other places. We were talking to friends yesterday in Canada, currently experiencing another blizzard. What was it? minus 23 when we were speaking to them, and it was 23 in our kitchen. It's an issue for them in the house. Those of you who have been in those cultures, you know. You've got to be appropriately dressed if you're going to be able to survive. Not just feel comfortable, but actually survive in those climates. Here's this woman, diligent in those areas. She makes extra garments to help supplement. She makes linen garments and sells them and supplies or possibly even delivers sashes for the merchants. She goes to the markets. She goes to the ship docks, wherever it is where those merchants are. She goes with the goods that she has laboured at home and she sells them, and she won't get ripped off. She goes about it in a wise and a prudent way. We come away from all of this description of her industrious diligence, and if you're anything like me, surely we ask, how can she fit all this in? I thought you said, Pastor, seems like Superwoman to me. Well, let's not forget, as I've already reminded you, she has servants at home to help her. Let's not forget that it does seem that her children most likely are no longer babies and little infants around her feet that demand that older. But I think we also must acknowledge, even taking those factors into consideration, that she still had a lot on. You see, this woman, it seems, had a godly ability to organise her time and to be efficient. She fears God, remember. That means she not only wants to please God, she earnestly desires to be like God in very practical ways. And the God, can we say in simple terms, is organised. The God who reveals Himself to us in Genesis chapter 1 and 2 is a God who is clearly a God of order. He is not a God of confusion. You look at the wonderful order in Genesis. It's not like God thinks, okay, it's day 2. Now what am I going to do? I better respond to that situation. He's got order. There is plan. It's not a mess. It's not a confusing situation. Walk into His garden and everything is in its right place. There's a God-like quality to be organised. And this godly woman possessed the ability to organise her day and her week well. It has to be that, otherwise there's no way that this would have happened. So maybe she would sit down. Some of you do. Each day. Or perhaps, at least in her mind, she had major tasks that she was going to do on Monday, major tasks she was going to do on Tuesday, and so on and so forth, all through the week. Yes, she was flexible. But she was organised to that degree. She wasn't chasing her tail half the day, coming back and doing the other part of the thing. There's a measure in which you have to do that in ordinary life, particularly when the children are young. But the godly woman is not stumbling through the house over one pile of washing and then over the ironing and then over the groceries that were there from 3 weeks ago. She's not wondering what to do next because there's no reason. Everything is in its right place. She's organised. And as we saw before, in verse 21, before the cold comes, before the snowy weather arrives, she's organised. It's not like one day it gets cold and you think, oh, that's right, It's winter. I better run. She's got the clothes already stocked up in the wardrobe before the snow comes. She's organised. This is not just some aspect of her personality. It's a characteristic of God to be orderly. She knows what meals she'll serve, balanced diet, because she's thought it through for the household. She knows that there will be variety for a household because she's thought it through. Verse 27. The general statement there at the start of that verse says, she watches over the ways of her household. She maintains a good oversight of all that's happened. She's hard-working. She's organised. Now let me say briefly by way of application. Young ladies, do you want to be a virtuous woman? Well, you need to learn now, you need to practice now what it is to be organised. If you can't be put a ring on one day and say, I do, that suddenly you're going to be organised. If you're going to be a virtuous woman, you have to settle it now. You have to be hard-working. Do the best. Do the most that you can now so that you might enter into marriage with the approach. Be doing good to your husband to be. So I guess I'm primarily speaking to the single ladies, to the young ladies, to the teenagers especially. Don't be afraid of failing in the kitchen. Practice makes perfect. They used to tell me when I learnt tennis. Practice makes perfect by making mistakes. Don't be scared about the mistakes. Be patient, brothers, with your sisters. Fathers, be patient. Encourage them. Those of you who are already married, can I ask? Are there new skills adding to your repertoire? Some of you have got many wonderful skills. Are there not more that you could be adding to assist, to be doing good to your husband, to help in your household? Are there not more things that you could be developing? Are there not new meals that you could try? Maybe you say, well, I'm not really sure where to start with some of those things. Well, I think the Bible is immensely practical. Top point, that is immensely practical. Older women are to be instructing, that is to be training the younger women, and most of those things, almost absolutely all of those things spoken about in that passage are about domestic life, and especially in the area of being homemakers. Can help the younger women in the homemaking area. It just may mean you may have to just ask them. I don't think they're going to push themselves on you, and that's fair enough. You need to ask them. Maybe you can just have a couple with them and spend some time with these experienced ladies, those who are to some men. Let them be your teacher in good things. And that, of course, means for those of you who are the more mature ladies, look for ways to encourage the young ladies. Don't put them off. Encourage them that we might all be better for our God. It's part of practical Christianity. The virtuous woman. Can I just give a balancing word here to the wives and mothers before we move on? Maybe you're feeling overawed by this woman. The woman here obviously enjoys good health and has a vigorous, no physical or emotional struggles are spoken about. So let's be honest about that. Let's see that for what it is. And God knows your physical. God knows your emotional constitution because He gave it to you. So be realistic. Don't try and use it as an excuse, but be honest and be realistic before Him. Under His eye, in the fear of God. At the end of the day, the important thing for you is to have a godly attitude toward hard work. Are you diligent? In the circumstances where you are, as God has made you, are you? And ultimately it's one that you have to have right before God. Whatever it is then that you can do under God's watchful eye, surely the word of the Scripture is, do it with all your might. Do it with all of your might, whatever that level might be, and it's different for different ladies, but do it with all that you have, and do it as unto the Lord. Now I know that some of the ladies here, God has given you much energy, and that's a good thing. Don't waste it. Use it in practical, godly ways that are outlined in this passage. Okay, let's move forward. In the third place, we see in this passage... Now, in the interest of time, we're going to have to really be more brief here, but there are some aspects that we may come back and revisit in a couple of weeks when it comes to this. So just let's see what the passage states in verse 20. Her compassionate tenderness. See it here. She extends her hand to the poor, hands to the needy. The virtuous woman has a big heart. We've seen her primary focus is to her immediate family. Her primary focus is to her own husband, but that isn't her exclusive. She also has a concern for needy people. You see, the virtuous woman is like her Lord. She has a heart to help people who are nearby and people who are far off. Because she is near the home, but at other times she does go afar off like merchant ships. When she sees someone in need, she doesn't close up her heart. She's generous and kind. She has a heart of compassion. John says in 1 John 3 in verse 17 and 18, whoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, my little children, let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and truth. Now what's implied by that is we should be loving in word. We should be loving in what comes from our tongue. And you'll notice in verse 26, she opens her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is the law of kindness. So in other words, she doesn't have a sharp, cutting tongue, but she has a soft, gentle, loving tongue. On her tongue is the law of kindness. That's what she loves in word and tongue. But she does things in deed and truth. Perhaps when she's out finding the best price for the food, maybe she's out delivering some of those clothes that she has made, she's giving them, passing them on to the merchants. She sees their great need. Her eyes see that need. Maybe she sees people as she's about in her travels and going places, and she sees people and they're lonely. They're needy people. They're physically poor people. Pat made at home, and I'm suggesting that because verse 20 is nestled between verses that are talking about her making garments. As a woman who fears God, effectively what it is she displays the Lord's compassionate heart to those who have need. She's not a woman consumed with her own little world. She's not a woman consumed with her own family, and that's all she has time for. That's where the bulk of her time will be, but that's not where all of her time is. She's a large heart. She has a heart that is large enough to give herself to her husband, to give herself to her children, and she's for the needs of others around her. She reaches out her hands to the needy. It's a lovely image, isn't it? She reaches out her hands. It's a stretch of love. It's a stretch of company. It's a stretch of welcoming. It's a stretch of comfort. Her compassionate tenderness. But fourthly, let's come to the fourth aspect I want us to focus on, and that is her outward appearance. Verse 22. She makes tapestry for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and made it before that the lady seems to be quite well to do, this woman. This is not saying that all godly women have to dress up like queens, like the wife married to King Lemuel. This is not saying that. What it is saying is that the godly woman takes care in how she appears. And as we said last week on another point, Proverbs 31 is not a passage that we are to take out of the Bible and just read by itself. Proverbs 31 is in the context of all that the Bible says about women, and even when it comes to her outward appearance. 1 Peter chapter 3 makes it very plain that the virtuous beauty, her focus is on the hidden person of the heart. That is, the inner beauty of a gentle and a quiet spirit. But that doesn't mean that she dresses in a daggy fashion. It's not like one or the other. But the Proverbs 31 woman that's recorded here, if you like, the video clip is describing her in ways that she is dressed outwardly in her appearance that her husband sitting at the gate with the other elders would not be embarrassed if she came to visit. She's presented in ways that he finds that is her husband. Which of course means her husband obviously has made sure that she had adequate money so that her outward appearance was tasteful, modest and appropriate for the culture and her station in life. You see, men, it doesn't just apply to ladies, this passage. You see how this applies to us as husbands? We need to make sure that we are not so stingy that we deny our wives what they need in order that they can have an appropriate outward appearance that would be pleasing to the God with whom they are living under. Now, it is true that some women go over the top with what they spend. And if you're one of those ladies and you know that you have that inclination, then you need to watch that tendency. But it's also true that some women could have a more attractive outward appearance if only their husbands were a little more. Verse 22, the first part, says, she makes tapestry for herself. Now, what's this reference to tapestry? Some have suggested that it's a reference to the furnishings of the home. At tapestry, like making carpets and cushions to make her home more presentable. And that perhaps this first part of verse 22 is a video clip taken from the living room again. And if so, well, we have a similar point here. That the husband allowed her, no, not extravagantly, but in appropriate ways for that culture and their station in life. What she does is under the eye of God. What they do as a couple is done in the fear of God. So they are not wasting money that we must hold. They're not doing that which is at the expense when they could be giving to help the need of the poor, those about them. I said to one of the men the other day, as men, as males, most of us would probably be happy and content. I think he agreed. But most women, I think I'm right, ladies, wouldn't be satisfied with that. And fair enough. God has made women with those, I'd call the nesting instincts, as it were. Like any bird, she wants to have her nest. She wants to line her nest with feathers. She wants it to be nice. She wants it to be the best and what is the most appropriate in that situation. So I'm suggesting, it's my suggestion, it's all. We shouldn't deny our wives that. Surely it's part, husbands, of what it is to nourish and to cherish our wives. To be thoughtful of them. Now obviously again we must sound the warning and the balancing word even on this side. Obviously we have to be very careful in this area. So easy to go overboard in these areas. But we also can be inconsiderate males as well. But I actually wonder, coming back to verse 22, that what we have recorded in the first part of verse 22 is not but a shot from the bedroom. And the reason I say that is because the Hebrew word for tapestry is used in one other place in the Old Testament, and it's also used in the book of Proverbs itself. So by seeing how this same Hebrew word is used elsewhere, that can help shed light. Please turn with me to one other passage, and that's Proverbs chapter 7. Now, as we come to this passage, let me say at the very outset that this is one of those passages where it speaks about a woman, and this is a bad woman. Okay? This is a bad woman in this passage. She is far from... But notice something of what's said here from verse 16 and following. Proverbs 7, verse 16. I have spread my bed with tapestry, coloured coverings of Egyptian linen. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh alloys. Let us take our fill of love until morning. Let us delight ourselves with love. Now the point being that part of what this seductive woman does, as she is described in this chapter, is that she tries to lure men to her bed. She makes especially her bed, as it were, inviting. She spreads, verse 16, her bed with tapestry. That's the same Hebrew word. So I wonder then, coming back to chapter 31, that what we have in the first part of verse 22, if you like, is a censored. And the virtuous wife makes the bed physically attractive or enticing for her husband. She knows what her husband likes, and that's their private business. But she wants to improve their love life, so she actively does that which enhances that part of their marriage. Woman in all areas of her life. She renders to her husband the physical affection he is due in the language of Paul. She does her husband good. How long for? A week after the honeymoon? All her days. Well, ladies, especially those of you who are married, here is the virtuous woman, her practical godliness. What's your response? Your response? I can't. I can't. Sorry to use myself as the illustration, but it seemed the best to fit. When I was a boy, obviously my mum used to tell me to do certain things, often say, I can't. And she obviously said it so many times that it's at least in my memory now. She'd say to me, there is no such word, Troy, as can't. And that wasn't an English language lesson, obviously. What's your response? Can't? What's Paul's response? I can, he says. But he tells us how he can. I can do all things through Christ, who strengthens me. Myself? Can't. No debate. But I can through Christ, who strengthens me. With God, all things are possible. Yes, ladies, in your own strength, you can't do this. But with God, you can. Have Christian woman the Holy Spirit? Is not God's grace sufficient for you in your every weakness? Are there not experienced ladies in this congregation that you could talk to and pray with over these matters? Before you, the ideal woman. All her faults, all her failures are edited out, so that you can concentrate on imitating everything, for every one of her traits in this passage are godly. Learn the passage, ladies. Will. That was the original intent when this passage was given. But if you're a single woman, a young lady here, you look at this passage and you say, well, it doesn't really apply to me because that's a married woman. She's a wife. You know why I say that? Because when we look through our Bibles to find numerous examples of virtuous women, they are not all married. We said last week Ruth is called a virtuous woman. She earned her praise as a single woman, and in her case, and even though she didn't have a husband to care for, she didn't have children in her life, at least at that point, she lived in singleness. And yet it was actually in her relationship with Naomi where she shines. Her diligence, her love. To that relationship, she gained the reputation of usefulness as a single woman. She was even known in her community as being an excellent woman. In the New Testament, we come across a lady by the name of Dorcas in Acts chapter 9, a woman who also was single. She was very skillful with her hands. She was generous. She was compassionate for those in need around her. And as even an older woman, she shined in her virtue. And at her death, garments that she made for them, and they showed them. Her lifestyle was one in which she gave herself to others, and she did it in a very practical and a very caring way. Now, many of the unedited, we can call them that, many of the Bible are married. But they are not all married to godly men. There's Abigail in 1 Samuel 25. She's praised. Her works praise her, and remember, she's married to a richer. Her husband's a fool. That's what Nabal means. He's a drunkard. He's a hard man. That's what the passage says about him. And yet, it is in that very context that she is a noble and a virtuous woman. It's in that context that she shines for the glory of God. She has one of those marriages herself to sleep many nights. But still, she's praised in the gates. May God help each of you ladies, young, mature, single, married, happily married or struggling in marriage, each of you to be virtuous women. God calls all of us, brethren, whether we're women or men, whether we're married or single, we are to walk before God with a godly fear. May He give us fresh measures of His grace and Spirit that rise by practical godliness.